On March 4th, 1944, in the heart of Cleveland, Ohio's gritty Fairfax neighborhood, Robert Dwayne Womack was born. He entered a world defined by the dual realities of post-war American industrial might and the harsh, unyielding grip of racial segregation and poverty. He was the third of 5 sons born to Friendly Womack Sr. and Naomi Womack, a family deeply embedded in the bedrock of faith and labor. His father was a man of immense fortitude, working grueling shifts in the unforgiving heat of the local steel mills by day, then transforming into a fiery Baptist preacher by night and on weekends. His mother, Naomi, was the quieter spiritual center of the family, a talented musician who played the organ at their church, filling their small home with the sound of worship. Life for the Womack family on East 85th and Quincy Avenue was a daily struggle for survival. The promises of the post-war boom rarely trickled down to the city's segregated black communities. The Womacks, along with many other families, were crammed into a tiny, often dilapidated apartment, a space far too small for 2 adults and 5 growing boys. The brothers, Friendly Jr., Curtis, Bobby, Harry, and Cecil, shared beds and lived with the constant presence of hardship. Bobby would later recall the poverty with a characteristic mix of dark humor and stark realism, quipping about fishing pig snouts from the trash for dinner and noting that in their neighborhood the rats were so commonplace that we didn't bother the rats and they didn't bother us. In this environment, music was not a luxury. It was a necessity. It was an escape from the cold realities of the industrial city and a direct line to a higher plane of existence. The Womack household was steeped in the sound of gospel. It was the music of their parents, the soundtrack to their spiritual lives, and the first musical language the boys ever learned. From a very young age, Bobby was captivated by the sound of the guitar, an instrument his father played with skill and passion. Friendly Sr., however, was strict and protective of his instrument, forbidding his sons from touching it. But Bobby's innate musical curiosity was too powerful to be contained by rules. One day, when his father was at work, he snuck the guitar down from its hiding place in the closet. In his youthful eagerness, he played it with such force that he snapped the high E string. Panicked at the thought of the whipping he was sure to receive, he tried to fashion a repair using a shoelace. When Friendly Sr. came home and discovered the transgression, his anger was palpable. He was ready to punish his son, but in a moment that would change the course of all their lives, he chose a different path. He looked at Bobby and issued a challenge. You broke it, you play it. What happened next was the stuff of legend. The young Bobby Womack, barely big enough to hold the instrument properly, began to play, and what came out was not the clumsy fumbling of a disobedient child, but the fluid, intuitive, and astonishingly proficient sound of a natural-born prodigy. He played everything he had ever heard, effortlessly channeling blues licks, country riffs, and soulful melodies. His father stood stunned into silence. The impending punishment was forgotten, replaced by a sense of awe and recognition. He saw the gift not just in Bobby, but in all his sons. Shortly thereafter, Friendly Sr. went out and bought guitars for all 5 of them, transforming their home into a crucible of musical creation. With their father's blessing and guidance, the 5 Womack boys were officially formed into a musical group, the Womack Brothers. Their initial repertoire was pure gospel, modeled on the powerful harmonies and fervent performances they witnessed in their parents' church every Sunday. Friendly Sr. became their first manager, instilling in them a rigorous work ethic and a deep understanding of harmony. By the mid-1950s, they were no longer just a family act performing in their living room. They were a professional gospel group setting out on the touring circuit. Life on the gospel highway in the segregated America of the 1950s was grueling. They were just children, often having to stand on Coca-Cola crates to reach the microphones in church halls and auditoriums across the Midwest. They traveled for long hours in cramped vehicles, ate cheap food, and stayed in segregated motels, or more often, in the homes of local church members. It was a world away from the glamour of popular music, but it was an invaluable education. They honed their craft night after night, learning about stage presence, vocal endurance, and the powerful, almost mystical connection that could be forged between a performer and an audience. They shared stages with some of the biggest names in gospel music, including the magnificent staple singers. It was on this circuit that they absorbed the nuances of Black American music, learning from the masters. The experience forged an unbreakable bond between the brothers. But it was Bobby, with his prodigious guitar skills and a voice that was beginning to develop its signature raw, raspy edge, who was increasingly seen as the group's natural leader. In 1953, a fateful booking placed the Womack brothers as an opening act for the undisputed kings of the gospel circuit, the Soul Stirrers. The group was led by a man who possessed a once-in-a-generation talent, an almost supernatural charisma, and a secret burning ambition that extended far beyond the world of gospel. His name was Sam Cooke. Cooke, with his matinee idol looks and a voice as smooth as velvet, was already a superstar in the gospel world, but he had his sights set on the far more lucrative and influential world of secular pop music. When Sam Cooke saw the Womack brothers perform, he was immediately struck by their raw talent, their tight harmonies, and their youthful energy. He saw a reflection of his own beginnings, and in the fiery young Bobby, he perhaps saw a kindred spirit, a musician with a deep soul and a restless heart. He took the brothers under his wing, becoming their mentor, their guide, and their hero. Bobby would later say, "Sam was on that gospel highway, so we got right on there after him. He taught us everything about the business." Cooke saw their potential to follow in his footsteps, to make the leap from the sacred to the secular. It was a controversial path, one that many in the deeply religious gospel community viewed as a betrayal, a selling of one's soul. But for a group of ambitious young men from the slums of Cleveland, the promise of fame and fortune was an irresistible call. By the early 1960s, Sam Cooke had successfully executed his crossover, becoming one of the biggest pop stars in the world with hits like You Send Me and Chain Gang. He used his newfound power and wealth to launch his own record label, SAR Records, a groundbreaking enterprise for a black artist at the time. One of the very first acts he signed was his young protégés, the Womack brothers. Under Cooke's guidance, the group underwent a transformation. He renamed them the Valentinos, giving them a sharper, more modern, and decidedly secular image. He coached them on songwriting, stage presence, and the nuances of the pop music industry. The transition was not always smooth. Friendly Womack Sr. was initially dead set against his sons, singing the devil's music. But Bobby, now a confident young man, convinced him that it was their destiny. In 1962, the Valentinos released their first major single under their new identity, Lookin' for a Love. It was a raw, upbeat R&B track, driven by a powerful rhythm and featuring Bobby's increasingly distinctive gravelly baritone lead vocal. The song became a significant R&B hit, putting the Valentinos on the national map and marking Bobby as a compelling new voice in soul music. Their momentum continued to build. They toured nationally with James Brown and other major artists, honing their act and developing a reputation as a dynamic live band. In 1964, they released the song that should have been their definitive breakthrough, It's All Over Now. Co-written by Bobby and his sister-in-law, Shirley Womack, it was a perfectly crafted piece of mid-tempo soul, a tale of heartbreak, delivered with a confident, rolling groove. The song became a respectable hit on the R&B charts, and it seemed poised to push the Valentinos to the next level of stardom. However, their song had traveled across the Atlantic Ocean. In England, a young, scruffy, and ambitious blues rock band called the Rolling Stones heard It's All Over Now and were captivated by its raw energy and soulful melody. They quickly recorded their own, more rock-oriented version. The result was a sonic explosion. The Rolling Stones' cover of It's All Over Now shot to number 1 on the UK pop charts, giving the band their very first chart-topping hit. For Bobby Womack, this was a moment of profound and painful contradiction. On one hand, the royalty checks that began to flow from the song's massive success were life-changing. It was more money than he had ever seen. On the other hand, it was a harsh lesson in the often brutal realities of the music business. He had, on the advice of his label, sold the publishing rights to the song for a relatively small sum. He had written a classic, but the vast majority of the immense fortune it would generate would go to others. He would publicly complain about this deal for years, a lingering source of bitterness. However, the cover did have one undeniable benefit. It established Bobby Womack, the songwriter, as a credible and important new talent on the international stage. The Valentinos were poised for greatness. They had a powerful mentor in Sam Cooke, a growing string of hits, and the respect of their peers. The future seemed limitless, and then, in an instant, their entire world was shattered. On December 11th, 1964, the news flashed across the country. Sam Cooke, aged just 33, had been shot and killed at the Hacienda Motel in Los Angeles. The official report from the Los Angeles Police Department was a sordid tale of a drunken altercation with a woman, which culminated in Cooke breaking into the motel manager's office and being shot in what was ruled a justifiable homicide. But from the very beginning, the story didn't sit right with many in the community. Whispers of a setup, of mob involvement, or of a politically motivated assassination tied to Cooke's increasingly vocal support for the civil rights movement and his demands for economic empowerment began to circulate immediately. The true circumstances of his death remain a subject of intense debate and speculation to this day. For the 20-year-old Bobby Womack, the news of Sam Cooke's death was a cataclysm. Cooke was more than just a mentor and a record label boss. He was a father figure, a big brother, and the man who had given him his dream. Bobby had been playing guitar in Cooke's touring band, learning every facet of the industry by his side. The loss was profound and disorienting. In the chaotic and grief-stricken days that followed, Bobby rushed to be with Sam's widow, Barbara Campbell Cooke. He later claimed his motives were pure. He was deeply concerned for Barbara, who was now a young widow, and he feared that in her immense grief she might harm herself. He stayed by her side, offering comfort and support through the funeral and its immediate aftermath. The funeral itself was a massive event in Los Angeles, drawing thousands of mourners from the music industry and the broader community. It was here that the first whispers of scandal began. Bobby's presence was noted as being particularly close to the grieving widow. And then he made a decision that would forever alter the course of his life and legacy. He showed up at the funeral dressed in one of Sam's own favorite suits. To some, it may have seemed like a tribute. To many others, it was an act of shocking presumption, a sign of a young man overstepping his bounds in the most audacious way possible. What followed turned the whispers into a roar of condemnation. On March 5th, 1965, which was Bobby Womack's 21st birthday, and a mere 77 days after Sam Cooke had been buried, Bobby and Barbara were married in a small ceremony at a Los Angeles courthouse. The news exploded like a bombshell across the music world. The soul community, a tight-knit world built on deep loyalties and unwritten codes of conduct, was horrified. The act was seen as the ultimate betrayal of his mentor. It was viewed as a cold, calculated move by an ambitious young man to seize control of Cooke's legacy, his music catalog, and his wife. The backlash was immediate, overwhelming, and brutal. Radio DJs who had once championed the music of the Valentinos now refused to play their records, effectively blacklisting them from the airwaves. Audiences who had once cheered for them now booed them off stages. The career of the Valentinos, which had been on a steady upward trajectory, was stopped dead in its tracks. The scandal was so toxic that it destroyed the group. The condemnation was not just professional, it was deeply personal. Bobby's own brothers, who had stood by his side since their childhood days in Cleveland, turned against him, horrified by his actions. And Sam Cooke's family was enraged. Cooke's brothers reportedly cornered Bobby in a hotel room in Chicago and viciously attacked him, leaving him with a broken jaw. He received hate mail, including one horrific package that contained a baby doll in a coffin, a clear and terrifying threat. Even Sam Cooke's father, a respected minister, publicly expressed his deep concern for his 11-year-old granddaughter, Linda, who, through this shocking marriage, had just become Bobby Womack's stepdaughter. For his part, Bobby always maintained that his intentions were honorable. He insisted that he was simply trying to protect a vulnerable woman and that Sam Cooke, who had lived a famously complicated romantic life himself, would have understood and even approved. In his memoir, he recounted Barbara's desperate plea to him in the depths of her grief. "If you promise to give me 5 years, I will give you a lifetime. Whatever you need to do. I just need you to walk with me here." He portrayed himself as a young man thrust into an impossible situation, making a decision out of a misguided sense of duty and affection. But the world did not see it that way. In the court of public opinion, Bobby Womack was found guilty of the highest treason, and he was sentenced to a long and difficult exile from the spotlight he had so desperately craved. An outcast from the very community that had nurtured him, Bobby Womack found himself at a crossroads. His career as a frontman was over before it had truly begun. A lesser talent, or a less resilient spirit, might have faded into obscurity completely, becoming a forgotten footnote in the history of soul music. But Bobby was, above all else, a survivor, and his talent as a musician, particularly as a guitarist, was simply too immense to be ignored. Unable to secure a record deal as a solo artist, he pivoted. He channeled his energy and his prodigious talent into the world of session work. He became a hired gun, one of the most in-demand guitarists of the late 1960s. His distinctive, funky, and deeply soulful guitar style, a style that was both rhythmically complex and melodically rich, became a secret ingredient on countless legendary recordings. If you were a major artist recording a soul album in the late 60s, you wanted Bobby Womack on guitar. He became a key player in the legendary sessions at American Sound Studio in Memphis, contributing to hits for artists like Joe Tex and the Box Tops. He played on some of Aretha Franklin's most iconic albums, including the masterpiece Lady Soul, his guitar licks adding a layer of gritty authenticity to her majestic voice. He worked with Dusty Springfield on her classic album Dusty in Memphis. He also began to flourish again as a songwriter, finding a new outlet for his creative voice by writing for other artists. He penned a string of hits for the fiery soul singer Wilson Pickett, including the classic tracks I'm in Love and I'm a Midnight Mover, a title that would later become the name of his own memoir. This period in the wilderness was, in a strange way, a blessing. It allowed him to rebuild his reputation from the ground up, not based on his scandalous personal life, but on his undeniable musical talent. He earned the respect of his peers through his professionalism, his creativity, and his incredible skill. He was no longer just Sam Cooke's controversial protege. He was Bobby Womack, the master musician. By 1968, enough time had passed and enough goodwill had been built for him to test the waters with a solo career once again. He signed with Minute Records and released his debut solo album, Fly Me to the Moon. The title track was a stroke of genius. He took the breezy Frank Sinatra pop standard and completely deconstructed it, reimagining it as a raw, gritty, down-home soul testament. He slowed it down, infused it with a swampy rhythm, and sang it with a voice that was now weathered by pain and experience. It was a bold artistic statement, and it signaled the arrival of a major solo artist. The album was a moderate success, and it laid the groundwork for the incredible creative run that was to come. The early 1970s saw Bobby Womack finally achieve the solo stardom that had so long eluded him. He entered a period of intense creativity, releasing a series of albums that are now considered classics of the soul genre. His albums Communication, 1971, and Understanding, 1972, were masterpieces, showcasing his mature voice, his deeply personal songwriting, and his incredible prowess as a guitarist and producer. The hits started to flow, each one a perfectly crafted gem of soul music. That's the Way I Feel About Cha, from the Communication album, was a tender, pleading ballad that climbed to number 2 on the R&B charts. Its raw vulnerability and Bobby's heartfelt vocal performance struck a deep chord with listeners, reestablishing him as a powerful voice in popular music. He followed it with Woman's Gotta Have It, a smooth mid-tempo groove that served as a cautionary tale for men. Co-written with his brother Cecil and a friend, the song offered sage advice on the intricacies of love and relationships, and it became another smash hit. Then, in 1972, came the song that would forever define him, his signature anthem. He was approached by the film director Barry Shear to write and perform the title track for a new blaxploitation film called Across 110th Street. The film was a gritty, violent look at life in Harlem, and it needed a theme song that could capture its dark, world-weary tone. Bobby delivered a masterpiece. The song Across 110th Street is a cinematic tour de force. Its driving, funky rhythm, its evocative, streetwise lyrics about the struggle for survival, pimps trying to catch a woman that's weak across 110th Street, and Bobby's powerful, impassioned vocal performance perfectly captured the mood of the film and the era. The song became an instant classic, an anthem of urban strife that has since been immortalized in countless other films, most notably in the opening credits of Quentin Tarantino's 1997 film Jackie Brown. It cemented Bobby Womack's status as not just a hitmaker, but as a serious and important artist, a true poet of the soul. He was at the absolute pinnacle of his artistic and commercial success. He was a respected musician, a successful songwriter, and a bona fide soul star. But just as he reached this professional peak, his chaotic personal life, a tangled web of his own making, came crashing down upon him once again, leading to a new decade of darkness and despair. The early 70s may have been Bobby Womack's professional golden era, but his personal life remained as turbulent as ever. In 1970, his tempestuous marriage to Barbara Cook, the relationship that had caused so much scandal, imploded in the most dramatic and painful way imaginable. Barbara discovered Bobby in bed with her 18-year-old daughter, Linda, Sam Cooke's daughter, the young girl who had become Bobby's own stepdaughter. The betrayal was absolute. In a fit of rage and heartbreak, Barbara pulled out a handgun and shot him. The bullet grazed his temple, coming a fraction of an inch from killing him. The marriage was over. They divorced in 1971. In a final, almost unbelievable twist to this family saga, Linda Cooke would later go on to marry Bobby's brother, Cecil Womack, in 1979. Together as the musical duo Womack and Womack, they would have a successful career, scoring a massive international hit in the 1980s with the song Teardrops. The family entanglements were worthy of a Greek tragedy. The tragedies for Bobby, however, were just beginning. In 1974, his younger brother, Harry Womack, was brutally stabbed to death by his own girlfriend. The murder took place in Bobby's Los Angeles home. The girlfriend had reportedly discovered women's clothing in the room where Harry was staying, clothing that actually belonged to Bobby's girlfriend at the time, and, in a jealous, mistaken rage, she attacked Harry with a knife. He was just 29 years old. Bobby rushed home to find his brother bleeding on the floor, and Harry died in his arms. The pain of this loss was immense. That same year, in a bizarre on-stage accident, Bobby was injured when he flipped over an amplifier, suffering a severe concussion that resulted in temporary blindness. For a musician so reliant on his senses, it was a terrifying and disorienting ordeal. He did what he always did. He channeled his immense grief and pain into his music. He had written a song called Harry Hippie as an affectionate, teasing tribute to his free-spirited brother. After his murder, he recorded the song, and it was transformed by his grief into a poignant, heartbreaking elegy. The song became a hit, but it was a success born from an unbearable sorrow. The cumulative weight of these tragedies, combined with the pressures of fame and the pervasive drug culture of the 1970s music scene, finally pushed Bobby over the edge. His addiction to cocaine, which had been a part of his life for years, spiraled completely out of control after the tragic death of his infant son, Truth Bobby, in 1978. The baby, just 4 months old, suffocated after becoming wedged between the bed and the wall in a tragic accident. "That changed me forever," Bobby would say years later. The loss was too much to bear. He dove headfirst into the abyss of drug addiction. He ran with a fast crowd, including fellow musical genius and notorious drug abuser Sly Stone. He would stay up for days on end, his life a blur of cocaine, alcohol, weed, and pills. "I was really off into the drugs," he confessed in a brutally honest 1984 interview with Rolling Stone magazine. "Blowing as much coke as I could blow, and drinking and smoking weed and taking pills, doing that all day, staying up 7-8 days. His career predictably collapsed. The quality of his music suffered. The rise of disco began to eclipse the raw, gritty soul music he was known for, and he struggled to find his place in the new musical landscape. In a desperate and misguided attempt to stay relevant, he recorded a country album, BW Goes C and W, which was a commercial and critical disaster. By the end of the decade, it seemed as though the man who had survived so much, scandal, exile, violence, and grief, was finally succumbing to his own self-destructive demons. Just as he seemed destined to become another tragic casualty of the music industry, Bobby Womack once again proved his incredible resilience. In the early 1980s, after hitting rock bottom, he made the courageous decision to save his own life. He entered a rehabilitation facility and began the long, arduous, and painful process of conquering his addictions. He was keenly aware of the alternative. The biggest move was to get away from the drug scene, he told the Associated Press in a 2012 interview. Everybody I knew did drugs. They didn't know when to turn it off. So for me, looking at Wilson Pickett, Sly Stone, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, they all died because of drugs. Bobby chose life. Clean, sober, and creatively re-energized, he staged one of the most remarkable comebacks in music history. He signed with a small independent label, Beverly Glen Records, and in 1981, he released the album The Poet. It was a masterpiece. The album was a collection of mature, reflective, and beautifully crafted songs that showcased his incredible voice, now imbued with a lifetime of pain and wisdom. The album was a huge success, topping the R&B charts and re-establishing him as a major force in music. He followed it up in 1984 with The Poet the Seku, another critical and commercial triumph, which featured powerful duets with the legendary Patti LaBelle. A single from The Poet, a smooth, melancholic ballad called If You Think You're Lonely Now, became an instant classic. It perfectly captured the sound of the emerging Quiet Storm radio format, and its world-weary wisdom resonated deeply with an adult audience. The song has since become one of his most enduring hits, a timeless piece of soul music that has been sampled by generations of R&B and hip-hop artists, from Mariah Carey to Kasai and JoJo. The comeback, however, was not without its own share of pain. In 1986, another immense tragedy struck when his son Vincent, who had struggled with his own demons, took his own life at the age of 21. The loss was devastating for Bobby, echoing the deaths of his brother Harry and his infant son Truth. It was a test of his newfound sobriety, but he held on, channeling his grief into his music and his commitment to his recovery. The 1990s and 2000s were quieter years for Bobby Womack. He was no longer a regular fixture on the pop charts, but he remained a respected and influential figure in the music world. He focused on collaborations with a diverse range of artists who admired his work, from the rock innovator Todd Rundgren to the Irish soul man Van Morrison. In a move that demonstrated his enduring relevance, he even collaborated with the groundbreaking hip-hop collective Wu-Tang Clan. He continued to tour, his live performances legendary for their raw emotional power. He also battled a series of serious health problems, including prostate cancer, diabetes, and pneumonia, facing each one with the same tenacity and fighting spirit that had defined his entire life. In 2009, his immense contributions to music were finally given their ultimate recognition when he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It was a moment of profound, hard-won, and long-overdue validation. Just when it seemed as though Bobby Womack's incredible story had reached its final chapter, he staged one last stunning comeback. Damon Albarn, the creative force behind the acclaimed British bands Blur and Gorillaz, and a lifelong fan of Womack's music, reached out to him. He recruited Bobby to be a featured vocalist on Gorillaz' ambitious 2010 album, Plastic Beach. The collaboration on tracks like Stylo was a revelation. It introduced Bobby's raw, weathered, and magnificent voice to an entirely new, younger generation of fans around the world, many of whom had never heard his classic work. The success of the Gorillaz project sparked a new creative fire in Bobby. It led to his final studio album, 2012's The Bravest Man in the Universe, which was co-produced by Albarn. The album was a bold, experimental, and deeply moving work. It masterfully blended Bobby's timeless, soulful voice with modern, minimalist electronic beats, creating a sound that was both classic and contemporary. The album earned universal critical acclaim, hailed as one of the best of his long career. It was a powerful and fitting final statement from a true musical pioneer, proof that even after a lifetime of turmoil and tragedy, Bobby Womack's creative fire still burned as brightly as ever. In his final years, he continued to face his health challenges with courage and grace. He was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, a cruel final blow for a man whose life was so defined by his memories and his art. On June 27, 2014, Bobby Womack passed away at the age of 70 from complications related to his many health issues. To look back on the life of Bobby Womack is to look at a landscape of staggering peaks and devastating valleys. He was a man of profound and often maddening contradictions. He was a devoted family man who betrayed his own family in the most public way. He was a spiritual man who battled worldly demons. He was a sensitive artist who lived a life of violence and chaos. He was a survivor who seemed at times to be hell-bent on his own self-destruction. His legacy is as complex and multifaceted as the man himself. As a guitarist, his funky, innovative style influenced countless musicians. As a songwriter, he penned classics that crossed genres and generations. As a singer, his raw, emotional, and imperfect voice became a touchstone for authenticity in an increasingly polished music world. His story is a cautionary tale about the ravages of addiction and the often brutal nature of the music industry. But it is also, and perhaps more importantly, a story of incredible resilience. His ability to overcome scandal, tragedy, and his own worst impulses to create music of such profound beauty and truth is a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. He was never a simple hero, nor was he a simple villain. He was a man who lived his life completely, his monumental flaws and his monumental talents inextricably intertwined. His voice, that incredible, raw, real instrument, lingers. It is a voice that speaks of pain, of joy, of regret, and of redemption. It is a voice that urges us to embrace our own messes, to find freedom in our creativity, and to keep moving forward no matter how hard life gets. In the final analysis, the story of Bobby Womack is the story of soul music itself, born from hardship, baptized in fire, and ultimately a triumphant testament to the beauty and complexity of the human heart. That's a wrap for today's video. If you enjoyed it, smash that like button, drop us a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss our new content. Thanks for watching.